RGE here, where they look at Awesomenauts, the new 2D platforming MOBA from Ronimo, or Ronimo, or something. I can't pronounce it. But I wanted to show off that this game launches with a configurator, because I have seen people say that there aren't options like windowed mode and graphics setting options, which isn't true. So here we have a pretty reasonable list of resolutions. I'd like to see some of the higher ones because, I mean, we have 1200, like monitors that go 1200 high and things like this on PC. So we need to get some not so standard resolutions. Like basically anything, like some 1610 resolutions. Currently, there seems to only be 16 by 9 and 4 by 3s. Next, we do have a windowed mode in this game. And then we have 3 settings for graphics. We have high, medium, and low. Now, those are appropriate graphics settings for this game because it's a 2D platforming sprite game. Like, platforming has nothing to do with it. I don't know why I put that in there. But it's a 2D sprite game. So you don't need a ton of graphics options. Like, no one... I'm not going to be worried about setting what my anti-aliasing is, or what my, like, is there HDR? That stuff doesn't matter. It's a friggin' sprite game. So, these are actually perfectly reasonable graphic settings for this game. Currently, there's not a huge amount of mercenaries available for selection, which is understandable. It's beta. Everything in this game is subject to change because it's beta, and not everything has been implemented yet because it's beta. So, I mean, soon we'll probably get some more characters. I know there's a new one that's supposed to be being released in the near future because whenever I launch the game, it tells me there's going to be a new character. After you choose your character, you go to the Loadout screen, which is essentially where you're going to choose the 3 types of upgrades you have for your abilities, and then the 3 types of upgrades for your auto attack, and then kind of like the 3 base stat upgrades, essentially like movement, health, and the other one that I have available right now, because I haven't obviously maxed out my account level, is like solar per minute generation. Essentially, it's GP5. It's a gold per 5 upgrade, basically. So you choose all your items and your ability upgrades, essentially, before you start the game. Which is nice because once you get in the game, you aren't dicking around trying to figure out your build. Now, it does take away a level of depth from the game. Like, in League or in Dota, you build your items to counter what the other team is building. In this, you can't do that because obviously you've already chosen your items before you start the game. The game that I joined was already in progress, so I don't know how long, or well, how far into the game they were, but I start with extra solar, which is essentially gold, just to make up for essentially being late to the game. When you're playing a game, you have bots on your team if your team isn't full. Teams consist of 3 players, by the way. This is a 3-on-3 game. And so if your team isn't full, then you have bots on your team. The bots aren't any good. But people, if they leave, then they're replaced with a bot and someone else can join the game. And when you join late, you get extra solar to make up for basically joining the game late. Getting extra gold in something like Dota or League wouldn't really make up for the fact that you're behind in levels, but in this game, your levels are determined by how many items you've bought. Essentially, it's just means how strong the person is an indication of basically how strong their character is, not what abilities they have unlocked, because you unlock your abilities by buying them with solar. If that makes sense. That should make sense. But you buy your abilities with solar, and you buy the upgrades for them with solar. So, starting off with extra solar, basically, it is a huge boost. It evens out the playing field pretty substantially. It's nice that you don't essentially get completely screwed if a teammate leaves. It's also one of the things that does make this game pretty casual, I guess is how you would describe it, because people do drop in and out of your games. Combat in Awesomenauts is pretty simplistic, and it's really because you only have 2 abilities, and auto attack and jump. Now, it's not a bad thing that the combat is simplistic, I'm just saying it's simplistic. I'd assume that the reason why you have so few abilities is that this game is being ported over from console. Like, it is already released on 360 and PlayStation. And on a gamepad, you don't have very many buttons. You only have, like, A, X, Y, B, or the PlayStation equivalent, and then a D-pad and some joysticks. And I guess you have triggers and bumpers now. I never played consoles with the bumper generation. I had original Xbox. That's as late as I went. But yeah, essentially you don't have very many buttons on a gamepad, so you wouldn't want to use a ton of abilities. And it's why a lot of games that do have a ton of abilities that are RPGs that get ported over from consoles end up broken as hell because they don't have proper hotkey support. Now that's not an issue in this game because you don't have a million abilities, so you don't need a huge amount of hotkeys. But this game does let you completely rebind the keyboard and just change everything for the mouse and the keyboard, which is necessary. Like, you need to be able to do that, because if you can't, it would be broken as hell. Well, actually, the default controls for this game are actually really good. It wouldn't be broken, but it is good standard for PC gaming that you rebind the keyboard. You should always be able to rebind your keyboard for a PC game, and there's games that just don't let you do that, and those games should be shunned, because that is just a lazy port, and that's not the case in this. Now, where the combat gets a little more complex is with the platforming. It brings in like a new skill set that hasn't been involved in MOBAs before, because I can't think of any that do have platforming. Do you know of any platforming MOBAs? Because I don't. What the platforming does in this game is it adds this vertical element to the game that you don't see in other MOBAs. And it catches you off guard, or at least it catches me off guard a lot still. I haven't played a ton of this game, like only a few hours, but I haven't figured it out. Like, I've figured it out. I haven't gotten used to it. So, when you're ganking, you don't really want to try to come up behind them, because you can see behind yourself. Where you want to come from is basically, you want to drop down platforms and basically come from above them, or you want to jump up below them and then cut them off. Like, you are sort of coming from behind them, but you're not running on the same level they are. You're dropping behind them, or you're jumping up behind them, but you're not running from straight out behind them. It just really changes how the ganking works and how you try to attack your opponents, like how you want to engage. I mean, in a way, it's the same concept as League and Dota and pretty much any other MOBA for when you're trying to gank, or whenever you want to start an engagement, which is you want to cut off their escape route and you want to surprise them. However, for whatever reason, the surprise is just so much more effective in this. Like, you see people coming in Dota, and you just run off because you know it's there. Like, when a guy jumps out of the jungle, you expect it. For whatever reason, in this, when a guy drops down from the top of my screen, I just can't hit him. I'm just like, oh god, what am I doing? And then just try to run away because I can't figure anything out. Maybe I'm just a little slow. Now, you may have noticed by now that when I spawn in, I have to guide a rocket down, and essentially it's a mini game. You try to hit all of the solar, that's what those gray and gold coins are. I guess there's silver and gold are what the colors are supposed to be, but you're trying to hit as many of the coins as possible, and it's because then you can spend it on items. Now, the amount of coins that you gain is essentially negligible. I mean, you're not going to make up for the fact that you died. Don't be like, I could die 10 times and I could afford this item. Because you will lose so much solar. It will not work for you. Do not do that. But what it does do is it gives you something to do when you're dead. Which is fantastic. Because it's just way too common that... Well, it's not that it's... How am I going to explain this? Okay, so when you die in something like League or Dota, you sit there for a minute and a half, and then you respawn. And that is boring as hell. And it's like that in pretty much every single MOBA. I can't think of any other MOBAs that have you do anything when you're dead. But in this, they give you this minigame to play. And that is cool. That is innovative. That is nice. Like, it doesn't break the balance of the game. The game's casual as hell, though, anyways, so who cares? But it doesn't break the balance, because essentially you're not gaining enough to even catch up. So, yeah, it gives you something to do, which is nice. Like, there's so often when you're playing a MOBA, your team will just be getting rolled, and you'll be stuck there, sitting in your damn spawn, dying. Like, just time and time again, dying in spawn. It's boring as hell. And in this, I mean, you die and you get to play a game. So that's cool. That's nice. It's probably one of the best parts about this game. Besides its fantastic art style. For whatever reason, I'm just digging the style of this game. Like, it's got pretty great art. Like, the style behind the art. I mean, it could obviously be of higher fidelity. It could always be of higher fidelity. But I mean, for a sprite game, it doesn't really need to be. But the sprites are actually, they're cool. The characters all have cool designs. The animations are done well. And then, like, the music helps add to the style, and the music for this game is actually really cool. There's just so much music, and it's different for every character. At least parts of it are different for every character. For example, like the loadout screen, every character has different music. The thing that this game does impressively well is that it creates this feeling as a result of all of the aspects of the game that just doesn't feel like anything else that's in the MOBA genre. Like, I can't directly say that this game feels like League, or that this game feels like Smite, or that this game feels like anything else I've ever played, really. It's kind of like how Blacklight feels like COD. They've recreated that COD feel, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Awesomenauts, I can't say it recreated any kind of feeling. It just feels correct, though. As long as it feels correct, that's a good thing. However, I think it's also really impressive to make a game that doesn't feel like anything else I've played, and make it feel natural and correct and just smooth. Like, the controls aren't janky, so it makes the combat feel smooth. In combat, there's not so many effects with the lighting and everything. There's not huge explosions and ridiculous amounts of animation that when you get a big fight going on, you can't tell what's going on. You can always tell what's happening. And that also helps make the combat feel really smooth. The platforming for the level design is done in a fashion that makes traversing the map not feel tedious and not feel too slow. Like, the platforming, none of it's particularly hard or challenging, but it's there and it is necessary to do in order to traverse the map, but it's not done in a fashion that makes it so that it breaks the game. Like, if the platforming were too challenging, or there was too much of an emphasis on it, then in many ways it would break the game, just because you wouldn't get that kind of, like, smoothness. The game flows really well, and it's just really impressive that they could build a game that has so many new things in it, like a MOBA with platforming and the respawn system, and really the combat is... It's not necessarily new, but it's not something we've seen in the MOBA genre. And it's just... the whole thing flows really well, and it feels correct. It feels natural. And I think that's probably one of the most impressive things about Awesomenauts, is that they've created something completely original that feels right. And that just doesn't happen normally. And it certainly doesn't happen in the porting process. I think it's even more impressive that they've managed to create something completely original that feels correct, then ported it over to a different platform, and it still feels correct.